Hi dear students, welcome to La Excellence. Today, let's discuss the Hindu News articles of 26th May 2020. Before we start with our discussion, there is a small announcement that La Excellence IAS is starting a new batch of live general studies classes for the prelims cum mains batch of 2021. You can contact this number for the registrations. Today, the personality of the day is S.R. Shankaran, a senior-most IAS officer who was popularly called as People's IAS officer. See, I want to narrate one of the story of his life which can change our perception with respect to the elitist civil service and which can make us to be grounded. And you can also use this in your general studies GS paper 4 case study. So one Shankaran sir travelled in the Agartala Airways and he landed in the Agartala. So he was posted as a new chief secretary of the Agartala. As soon as the flight landed, the Shankaran sir carried a small suitcase. He went to an auto rickshaw puller and asked him to drop to the circuit house. Meanwhile, he could observe there is a series of Lal Batti cars and the convoy of the constables waiting for some VIP to arrive at the VIP gate. So, but he, being very simple, he went to an auto rickshaw puller and asked him to drop to the circuit house, and he also agreed for an amount that is to be paid. Meanwhile, one of the constable heard about the circuit house and guessed whether it could be a Shankaran, the chief secretary of Agartala. Then it was too surprising to all the officers over there that it was the Shankaran sir who was sitting in the auto rickshaw. It shows the act of simplicity of Shankaran sir. At the same time, before he got down from the auto rickshaw, Shankaran sir paid the amount, the pre-agreed amount for the auto rickshaw puller, even though he did not travel. So many of the police officers and other VIP people told that, why are you paying? Because you've not traveled in the auto rickshaw. But Shankaran sir said, since I got into this auto, he missed the other passengers. I want to pay him that pre-agreed amount. So this shows that commitment what he has for the people. This act of commitment we could also see with respect to the upliftment of Dalit community, with respect to the nationalization of coal industry, with respect to the bonded labor community. His lifelong mission was to demystify the left-wing ideology. Yes, his personification of simple living, honesty, integrity, strong and modesty made him to be one of the diminutive civil servant who is a role model to so many IAS officers, and he was the one who stood for the marginalized sections of society. That's why called as the poor man's IAS officer. Let's start our discussion with the editorial analysis. Later on, we'll see the news highlights of today. So the articles' respective page numbers are mentioned in this particular slide. You can download today's notes in the PDF format in the link that has been given in the description box. Along with that, La Excellence, based on the daily newspaper analysis, will be giving a free LAX daily current affairs quiz. And this will be available in our elearn.lax.in section. So there, every day at 9:30 p.m., you can take up this quiz. And this quiz will be consisting of 10 MCQs. And the link for this daily test is also available in the description below. So please check for that. Let's see the first article of today. That is the problem with the liquidity push. So just understand with the heading only, it is trying to mention what would be the problem with the current liquidity push the government is trying to do with Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So along with that, see the title subheading also saying that even if partially successful, that is, if liquidity pushes is partially successful, it will culminate into an eventual default and the risk is only likely to intensify. Before dwelling into the article details, so this article is not important in the context of prelims. However, in the context of mains, especially it's important in GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues related to mobilization of resources. So what is the issue related to? It is related to stimulus package, and dimension is what are the limitations that we have with going for an Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. In this article, let's try to understand how the government is trying to give the liquidity push and what are the tools that government is trying to use to give this liquidity push. Apart from that, we should also understand how these tools or the liquidity push that has been given by the government, will it be beneficial or will there be a chances of default? In such a case, how this default will intensify the crisis? In such a scenario, what should be the measures that government should take instead of going for excess liquidity push? See, the emphasis of government on liquidity push was clearly evident with the 4 L's. Do you remember the 4 L's of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? The 4 L's were law, land, labor, So with this 4Ls, we can see the importance of liquidity that government tried to or want to achieve. So that's where government came up with Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan or the Self-Reliant Bharat. So under this context, government say that it is trying to give 20,000 lakh crores of amount. This amount is expected to be around 10% of GDP. So now the question raises over here is this amount is being given directly to the consumers, to the people, migrant laborers, or this is given to the tools of government? So which are the tools what I am trying to mention over here? It is about RBI, it's about banks, it's about the NBFCs, it's about other financial intermediaries. It may be like NABARD or SIDBI or National Housing Bank. So government, instead of directly giving money in the hands of the people, government is trying to give them through the tools of the RBI, that is through the banks or NBFCs, etc. So through this, government is trying to infuse capital in the hands of the businesses. It may be a small and medium enterprises, or it may be a business houses. So now let's understand what would be the crisis or the situation of these business houses. As you know, there is already there is a lockdown. Because of lockdown, the investments or input costs whatever the business houses would have put will be high. Okay, and there is a demand crunch. There is no much demand in the market. So if after all these things, if the business houses borrow this money, will they be used to capitalize that money? Amount whatever they are borrowing would be utilized more to maintain their present and the past commitments. So instead of making investment, they'll be meeting they want to maintain the current crisis. So in such a situation, whatever is the new revenues that they are generating or they are getting will be used as a default, because no investment will be made. So since the borrowed amount will be used to maintain the current payments, then in such a case, tomorrow when they have to repay the amount, because they have not made investment, there will be no returns on that investments. Then because of the demand crunch, the amount will also, they'll not be able to get in fresh revenues also. Scenario, they'll enter the vicious cycle of debt. In this current article, what they are trying to say is that the transmission, whatever is made by using the monetary policy tools, is weak, and the revival from out of this, or economic revival out of this, is very of less chances. What are the options that is present in front of the government now? One is working on the disposable incomes. Second thing is with respect to the transfer payments. So now government has already acted about the disposable incomes. You could see with government's Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan packages, where they are giving savings access from the provident fund contributions, or they are decreasing the TDS collections that is being made, or they are also making provision for IT refunds, earlier out IT refunds, etc. So through this, they are trying to increase the disposable incomes. However, government also has to focus on the additional payment transfer to the people in the form of wage subsidies, equity supports, and employment generation program. So with this, we can also ensure there is a demand side push in the economy. If that's not focused, then in such a case, with focusing excess on the liquidity push from the monetary policy, eventually it may lead to the bank crisis rather than the revival of economy. Moving on to the next article. This article is about the batting for free speech. This article is in the context of defamation cases that is being put up in Tamil Nadu. So here in this article, we'll try to understand much about what is defamation, what is criminal and civil defamation, what are the IPC sections related to defamation, and we'll also read what is the judgment that is given by the High Court with respect to the defamation cases. Prelims, they may ask you about the IPC sections of the Supreme Court judgments. However, in the context of the mains, it's very important with respect to the right of freedom of speech versus the state regulation. So here, issue is with respect to criminal defamation, and the dimension is about the government opting the defamation route. So what do we mean by defamation? Defamation means destroying the reputation of an individual or of an organization. The reputation can be spoiled either through a speech or through a written, or it can be the both. Okay, so defamation implies, very in simple terms, it's a destroying the reputation of an individual or the organization. So whenever we come to the defamation, it can be of two types. One is civil defamation, the other one is criminal defamation. For the civil liability, usually a monetary compensation has to be paid, whereas in case of a criminal liability, imprisonment for not less than 2 years will be given. PC sections that are related with the defamation cases are: one is section 499 and section 500. See, section 499 deals with the punishment. Deals with the constitutes to be a defamation. Either it may be civil or criminal. What will be considered as a defamation is mentioned in the 499. And in the section 500, they mentions about the punishment that will be awarded for the defamation. Most of the time, section 499 will be misused by the individuals as well as the organizations in order to file a defamation case against the individual. So whenever this is being misused, it is going against the fundamental right, that is Article 19(1)(a). What is Article 19(1)(a)? It's freedom of speech and expression. So section 499 versus the fundamental right will be the concern. Moving on to the highlights of this article, most of the times, it's not only in the Tamil Nadu, all over India, we can see whenever there is a criticisms against the government, then the government would come up with the defamation proceedings against the opposition leaders or on the journalist or media people. In such a scenario, the verdict of Justice Abdul Quddus, who quashed all the series of defamation cases that was filed from 2011-12, gives and tries to give a set of principles that is to be followed by the state government and the public servants before they initiate the defamation cases. If there is a criticism against the government shall not impulsively take it as a defamation. Instead, let it take it as a constructive criticism. So, now what the government is trying to do, considering it as a criticism, it's filing a defamation case. In such a case, then it is like a throttling the democracy. The second point is, government should have a higher threshold before invoking any defamation provisions. So in this regard, government first of all has to differentiate the defamation that is made against a public servant and the defamation that is made against the state. Government, before putting up a case, it has to examine that how a particular case is to be considered as defamation. So how is it affecting the governance of the state, or how exactly is it defaming the state? So this has to be understood first, then the state has to put up a case. And the third thing is about the public prosecutors. See, the public prosecutors should not act like a post office. They have to independently scrutinize the material that they're putting before the court. And it said that the essential ingredient for a criminal defamation should be an imputation that was done with reckless disregard for the truth or going against with the truth. Moving further, after understanding the principles that should be guiding the state government before they put up the cases of defamation, there is one more report that we have to consider here. That is G.S. Swaminathan case. In that, they mentions about the two exceptions to section 499. One, that is the public conduct of public servants. Second is the conduct on public question. So, according to this article, whenever the legislature feels that, it is demonstrated that the report or the criticism that is being made is against the public servant's conduct or on a public question, unless and until it is not violating or it is not imputation, or if it is not against the truth, then in such a case it will not be considered as a defamation. Therefore, the governments should stop the reckless filing of criminal defamation cases against the press. Let's move on to the next article, that is a well-balanced stimulus package. Here again, this article is focusing on the economic stimulus packages and how this economic stimulus package is trying to balance the demand and supply in the economy. You can see so many articles are coming up with respect to the COVID, the stimulus packages, all these things. First of all, don't try to rush over the articles. Instead, focus on the issue. All this issue is cornered around Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So first of all, go through the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan 5 trenches or the 5 installments PDF that is being given in the PIB. After going through that, then you can understand the criticisms, major criticisms which is made against them. See, if we go on with the articles like this, by the exams we can have at least thousands of articles. So instead of focusing on the article, try to focus on the issue. Issue is about the economic stimulus. In economic stimulus, you have fiscal stimulus and the monetary stimulus. And the second thing what they're trying to focus is about the supply and demand. And the third thing what they're focusing is about the structural reforms. So just try to understand the issue. What are the criticisms related to it? That's where you can make a more sensible answer for this particular question. In regard, in this article also, I'll not be dwelling into the much details. I'll try to give you an essence of this article. In the initial part of the article, they're trying to compare India with the US, where US has an unlimited reserves and US currency, that is dollars, is still the one of the most prominent global reserve currency. So in such a scenario, many of them are ready to invest in the dollars, and US can also draw the money or debt from the countries. So in such a scenario, what is India state? India does not have so much of freedom. India has its own constraints and compulsions. Because of these constraints and compulsions, government has have very well crafted its stimulus policy. Policy is totally focusing on the two objectives of the government. So what are the twin objectives? First of all, it is to minimize the human cost of COVID-19. That is, people who has got affected because of the COVID-19. Second is to use this crisis as an opportunity and bring in the bold structural reforms that is required in this economy. Now to consider the government response, first on the demand side. So as we can see with the Atmanirbhar Bharat, various trenches, government has to meet the demands of the MSMEs, Jandan, TDS, Narega, farmers and the migrants. So it is trying to infuse liquidity. It is trying to infuse liquidity from the demand side. Coming to the supply end, so government wants to ensure food security and farmers' income, prevent the crunches or liquidity crunch converting into insolvency or bankruptcy, and it is trying to improve the investment ecosystems by providing the credit guarantee schemes, etc. And they're also going for a restocking of credit by giving loans and advances to the street vendors, small families, etc. So with all these things, the government is trying to maintain the demand and supply push. So therefore, we can say that government minimizing the human cost of the COVID-19 crisis, also paving towards the structural reforms. It is also ensuring that in production will nowhere get harmed. At the same time, it is creating a strong ground for attracting the fresh investments. So as per this article, whatever the government's fiscal stimulus package has been taken, it is said to be a perfect balance. Let's see the next article, that is moving beyond geopolitics. See, before the COVID-19 crisis, there was the whole world was towards the data protectionism. That is data localization, data retention requirements. They wanted to weaken the encryption keys, etc. So right to privacy was considered to be the prime lifeline of the people. But now, with an Indian example also you can see, when we were supposed to install this Arogya Setu app, none of us were bothered about sharing our live locations. So, juncture we can see that this pandemic has brought a change in perceptions on the issues like privacy. So, under this context, when the whole world was focusing on the data localization, data protectionism, now this article says that post-COVID, the word and the tech giants, it may be the Google, all these people who are collecting the data, must be obligated to share data in the larger interest of the mankind. That is, data globalization is what they are suggesting in this particular article. So what you have to carry, the essence of this article is this, that is data protectionism to data globalization. In this regard, the government of India, which has a draft data protection law, also has to keep these things in mind while drafting its law. So this is the essence of what you have to remember from this article. Let's move on to the next article, that is International Labour Organization asking the Prime Minister not to dilute the labour laws. This article in the context of prelims will be very important to you. So they may ask you which are the various labour laws that is present in India and what is this transformation from this labour laws to the codes that has happened. They can also ask about the International Labour Organization, its functions and objectives. And thirdly, it can also ask you about the international conventions that India has signed with respect to the protection of labours. In the context of mains, they can ask this particular question in the GS paper 2, that is International Relations and International Institutions mandate. Also in GS paper 3 with respect to the economy and labour laws. So the issue over here is about the dilution of labour laws, and the dimension is ILO, that is International Labour Organization, intervention in the context of with respect to this dilution. Moving on further, you might have seen this particular image in the newspapers that is coming up. Don't try to mug up like what are the changes that Madhya Pradesh has done, Uttar Pradesh has done or Gujarat has done. Instead, try to understand by making this particular labour reforms what the government is trying to do. It is trying to allow the businesses to hire and fire among the host of other measures to uncycle the industry and attract more investments. The government has taken these measures to attract more companies, but in such a way, how is it affecting the labor welfare? So this can be an example of growth versus development. Will the companies has to develop at the cost of the laborers? That's really not fair. isn't it? In this context, many of the union leaders were not happy with respect to the labor reforms that is being done. In order to protect the interest of laborers, these trade unions, almost around 10 central trade unions, had written a letter to the International Labour Organization, and thereby International Labour Organization has intervened, and it is asking India's Prime Minister to send a clear message to the central as well as the state governments. Why they are sending a clear message to central and state government? It's because labor reforms is in which list? It is in the concurrent list. So they want to send a clear message stating that India will stand for its international commitments with respect to the conventions that is signed by India on the labor laws. So my next question is, do you think India will follow it or the states will follow it? See, remember, when India has ratified the conventions under ILO, it is equivalent to a legal status. It's something like the conventions are also equal to our legal systems in India. In simple terms, what I'm trying to say is convention is equivalent to a law. Suppose through the labor laws or through reforms, if you're violating this law, then in such a case, you're violating this convention also. So against the rule of law. And the second thing is you're also going against our international commitments that India has been given. So having known the importance of international labour organizations and its legal mandate, let's try to understand when it was established and about its functions. So first of all, it was established in 1919. It has its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, with the members of around 187. Here, the most important point what you have to remember is India is founding member of International Labour Organization. What is the mission of ILO? It is to promote the social justice and to protect the human and labor rights. And remember, the again important factor is it's the only tripartite UN agency. Brings in the representatives from the government, employers and the workers so that the policies and programs could be designed with all the stakeholders involved. The major functions of International Labour Organization is to come up with the international labour standards in the form of conventions and the recommendations. Second thing is it based to promote the right-based approach. It devises policies and programs. It also brings in the technical cooperation between the various countries, and it also promotes training, research and education and publishing of activities which promote the labour standards and organizations, and it also registers the complaints for violation of labour laws. Really remember, very important thing is here, they will register the complaints. Can they impose sanctions on the government if there is a violation of labor laws? Remember, they cannot impose any sanctions. So this could be a classic example where all the responsibilities have been given without adequate power. See, but remember, this particular article that is labor law related is very, very important in the context of UPSC. You can expect a question in prelims as well as in the mains. Moving on to the next article, it's an interview that is stating about the reverse migration to villages has set the economy back by 15 years. That is, like whatever progress that we had made in the last 15 years in the Indian economy, it has been reversed because of this lockdown. And they can also see one important factor that is being mentioned in this particular subheading, that India risk losing benefits of demographic dividend by not creating enough job for the new entrants. So here a very important caution message has been given in this interview that if India does not focus on creating a new jobs, then now we could see with the migrants returning to their native places, we are trying to give them with a manual jobs like through MGNREGA. But however, think of the progress that we have made on this human capital building. Then in such a case, we may lose the demographic advantage what we have. Even though this is a very good interview, we could not draw much of the points wherein that could be used for your examinations. So generally just glance through this article. You can use these perspectives in your essay paper. It could be used in the context of demographic dividend, or when they try to ask you about the reverse migration, or when it's about the human capital or harnessing the human capital in the context of demographic dividend. So let's move on to the next article, that is hardworking Kolam tribe couple become the landowners. See, historically whenever you see with respect to the tribal rights or tribal communities, there is always the biggest problem faced by them is land alienation. This is one of the classic examples which you can use in your exam as a value addition, wherein the real empowerment of the tribal people have happened. So tribal people have started owning the land by themselves. This article also links me to one of the Kannada literature specific book called as Chomana Dudi. In Chomana Dudi book, the whole life Choma strives to achieve a piece of land, and he dies without getting even a piece of land. So Choma all throughout his life, just because he's born in a particular tribal community or because of his ascribed status, because of his birth status, he'll not be able to own a land, and that is a stigmatization that was happened in that particular society. So today, I feel there is a change in the dynamics of the society. The society is really becoming an inclusive society in this context. In the context of prelims, you can expect a question on primitive vulnerable tribal groups and the criteria that is being used to identify them. Along with that, you can also expect a question on Kolam tribe as it is in the news. Then, in the context of mains, as an example of real empowerment, you can use this in the social justice part. And the issue over here is related to particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and the dimension is of socio-economic development. So through this article, we'll be able to learn about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups and about the Kolam tribes. Before we move on to the highlights of this article, first of all, let's try to understand what is particularly vulnerable tribal groups. See, these particularly vulnerable tribal groups are the marginalized section of the society. They belong to the scheduled tribes of India. They live in isolated places, and they are educationally and economically backward. That is, we can say they're away from basic amenities as well. So totally in India, we have around 75 categories of primitive vulnerable tribal groups. So what is the criteria that we are following to identify them? The first criteria is they should be following a pre-agriculture level of technology. That is, basically they are hunters and gatherers who are wanderers finding out their food. Then there should be a stagnant population or population should be declining. The third criteria is this extremely low level of literacy. And the fourth criteria is subsistence level of economy. So based on this criteria, we have classified 75 tribal groups as the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So do you think there is a constitutional mandate or constitutional support to this particular kind of categorization? No. The second thing that can come to your mind is, who is that who classified them as particularly vulnerable tribal groups? See, this kind of categorization was made in 1973 based on the Dibhar Commission recommendation. That is, those tribal communities who are little isolated and who are less developed compared to the other tribals. So this community was called as a primitive tribal groups by the Dibhar Commission. So later on in 2007, Government of India renamed as from the primitive tribal groups to particularly vulnerable tribal groups. And just for the facts corner, you can remember this fact that highest number of primitive vulnerable tribal groups are present in Odisha, and with respect to the largest population, we have Saharia people, that is from Madhya Pradesh. They have the largest population, and the smallest population is of Sentinelese. Most importantly, you have to remember the criteria that is used for determination of particularly vulnerable tribal group. Moving further, whenever you see UPSC prelims question paper with respect to the tribes, the most important question that they ask with respect to tribes is about their location. So you have to mandatorily remember the location of this Kolam tribe. They reside in Maharashtra, Telangana, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. So what would be their livelihood? They'll go for a subsistence agriculture. They speak Kolami language, which is a member of Dravidian language family. And one of the important facts about the Kolam tribe that what you have to remember is they have high incidence of thalassemia. Moving on to the article highlights, the article is trying to say that tribals, being a landless community, owning a land is something like an unthinkable phenomena. Because the tribal, once a landless agriculture labor couple who are living in Telangana, today because of their savings, they have owned the land. But still in India, it's always considered that tribals are the underdeveloped, vulnerable groups, and they're being landless, uneducated and isolated from the developed era. So because of these things, it has made an unthinkable phenomena. But with this, we can see a classic example how with a self-belief, how with an hard work, a tribal community can go for an empowerment of themselves. They've also become a role model for other tribal communities and tribal families to empower themselves. Moving on to the next article, here we have an interview saying that India has become more resilient to the disruptions in the crude supplies. See, even though the crude oil prices, global crude oil prices are coming down, Indian government is not ready to cut the prices. So that is where the second article is also related to. Despite glut, cut in the fuel prices is unlikely. In the context of prelims, what you have to remember is with respect to the oil prices and how oil prices will have impact on the Indian economy. With that, you also have to remember with respect to the OPEC countries and UPSC Mains, it's important in the context of GS paper 2, that is international relations, and it's also important in GS paper 3, Indian economy, that is with respect to the energy security. What is the issue related over here? It is related to the global oil prices, and the dimension is India's resilience towards the changing prices. See, what is the highlight of this article? They are trying to say the prices of the oil is coming down or spiraling down. Why? It's because of two reasons. First of all, there is a price war which is happening between the producing nations. The second reason is decrease in the demand because of the lockdown impact. Despite there being a decrease in the prices of oil at the global level, Indian government is not reducing or cutting the oil prices. Why is that so? It's because government is trying to say that instead of directly transferring the benefits of this to consumers, we are saving that particular amount for the later use. They use for this amount, they can use this amount to build our strategic reserve. So here in this context, what is the strategic petroleum reserve? See, in case of emergency, suppose there is no, we cannot import any of the fuel. In such a case, we need to have an emergency fuel storage within our country. So in that regard, we have Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited, which is working under the Oil Industry Development Board. We are saving over in this strategic reserve. We can use minimum for at least 22 days. So even if we don't have import for 22 days, we can manage with the reserve that we have stored. In this regard, government has built in the first phase 3 locations. Remember it: Vishakhapatnam, Mangalore and Padur. In the strategic phase 2 is built in Chandikhol, Odisha and Padur, Karnataka. How many reserves do we have as of now? It's totally 5 reserves that we are maintaining in different locations. An issue of oil prices comes into your mind. The first organization that should come into your mind is OPEC, that is Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So let's have a brief overlook over the OPEC countries. OPEC is Organization for Petroleum Exporting Country. It's a permanent intergovernmental organization which was established in 1960 with the Baghdad Conference. It manages the supply of the oils. Along with that, it also monitors the price. So it ensures that there is no much price fluctuations happening between the producing countries as well as the purchasing countries. And anyone who is exporting the oil can be part of the OPEC countries. OPEC originally had 14 member countries. Later on, OPEC Plus was added. Remember, OPEC se zyada, you have to remember OPEC Plus countries. So these are the countries, part of the OPEC countries. Still, they export the crude oils. To conclude this article, there was once a UPSC previous year question with respect to the oil prices. So the question is like this: what will be the impact of oil prices, or what will be the impact of reduction or downfall of oil prices on the Indian economy? Try to answer this particular question and try to reply it in the comment section. So let's see how you will answer it. Moving on further, we have your MCQs over here. So this 2019, this question was asked in the UPSC prelims about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. And there's again a practice question on particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Write your answers in the comment section. Tomorrow I would discuss this MCQs. I hope this video was helpful to you. Thank you.